I think I didn't do anything wrong, just tried to hold my life together while he was away. I didn't plan for this, didn't mean for the dates to blur or the timing to look bad. But now he's back, and the first thing he said wasn't welcome home. It was that he wants a DNA test. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Mirella Thorne, and I swear I didn't do anything wrong. At least, not the way everyone keeps saying I did. I was lonely, that's all. Evan had been gone for months, buried in that overseas project, and the house started to feel like a waiting room. You ever wake up next to a cold pillow and start wondering if you even exist in someone's world anymore? That was me. I kept everything together. Our daughter, the bills, the smiles for neighbors who asked where he was. So when Ronan started stopping by the clinic with coffee and easy jokes, I didn't think it was a crime to laugh back. It was attention, harmless, something to remind me I was still seen. I told myself any woman in my place would have done the same. But then Evan came home early and everything changed. The way he looked at me wasn't angry, it was calculating, like he was already adding things up. I thought we'd talk, fix it, move on. Now he barely speaks, just writes things down, quiet and calm like a man building a case. And yesterday, he said he wants a DNA test. When Evan first told me he'd be gone for half a year, I tried to act supportive. He said it like it was an opportunity, a big project overseas that could mean a promotion, better pay, maybe even a new house one day. I smiled, said all the right wife things. I'm proud of you. We'll be fine. Go chase your dreams. But inside, I hated the sound of it. 6 months felt like forever. I didn't say that, of course. You can't be the clingy wife who makes a man feel guilty for working hard. So I packed his clothes, tucked a note in his suitcase, and waved at the airport like I was part of some perfect picture. The first few weeks were fine, busy even. I worked my shifts at the dental clinic, took our daughter Lena to school, cooked dinner, kept the house neat. I made sure everything looked normal. But at night, the quiet got strange. Evan used to hum while brushing his teeth, used to tap his fingers against the nightstand. Now the house had no rhythm. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was even thinking about us. He called every few days, mostly short updates about work. I tried to fill the gaps, telling him about school projects and grocery prices, but he always sounded tired, distracted. After a while, his voice started blending into static. I told myself it was the time zone difference, not disinterest, but deep down, I felt invisible. That's when Ronan started showing up. He was a rep from one of the dental supply companies we worked with. Early 30s, sharp suit, easy smile. The first time he came by, he brought pastries for the staff. He said I looked too serious behind the reception desk. I laughed, probably harder than the joke deserved. It felt good to be noticed. He started timing his visits for my lunch breaks. We'd stand by the coffee machine while he talked about music or travel. I didn't realize how long we were talking until my coworker said I should just marry the guy already. I rolled my eyes, but something about the way she said it made me blush. At home, Evan's calls got shorter. Sometimes he texted instead, just updates about meetings. I told him he should call more, and he said the Wi-Fi was bad. I made a joke about him forgetting his family. He said, "You know that's not fair." I told him I was just teasing, but he didn't laugh. After that, he called less. I started sleeping on my side of the bed only, keeping the other half smooth. Lena began asking when Daddy was coming home. I told her soon, even though I wasn't sure what soon meant anymore. One night, after putting her to bed, I scrolled through my phone and saw Ronan had posted a picture at a jazz bar downtown. I liked it without thinking. He messaged me almost immediately. "You should come next time." I typed back something flirty but harmless, or at least That's what I told myself later. The next week, he brought me coffee again and asked if I liked live music. I said yes, that I missed it. He said, "Then let's fix that." I hesitated, but part of me liked the idea of being out, being seen again. Evan wouldn't know. He was an ocean away. And it wasn't like Ronan and I were doing anything wrong. We were just going out. Friends do that. The bar was small, full of low light and warm air. He ordered my drink before I could ask. We laughed about office gossip, about customers who called the clinic at midnight, about how serious my boss always looked. It felt easy. No responsibilities, no judgment. When he walked me to my car, he said I had a beautiful laugh. I said he was bad at goodbyes. He smiled and said, "Then don't say one." It wasn't a kiss, not that night, but it could have been, and that almost felt worse. The next morning, I told myself to forget it. But forgetting isn't easy when someone makes you feel alive again. I started dressing differently. Nothing dramatic, just more effort. My coworkers noticed. One of them joked that I had a secret admirer. I didn't deny it. Evan called that evening. He said his schedule had changed. He'd be home 2 weeks early. My stomach dropped. I said that was great, that Lena would be thrilled. He asked if everything was fine here. I said yes. Why wouldn't it be? He paused, then said, "You sound different." I laughed too loud and said, maybe I was just tired. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen staring at the wall. The hum of the refrigerator sounded too loud. I noticed Evan's work laptop on the shelf, still open from the last time he was home. I moved it slightly and saw a printed calendar page underneath. Downtown, 11:20 a.m. It looked old, maybe from before he left, but something about it made me uneasy. Why write such a specific time? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Ronan's words, Evan's voice, the empty space beside me. The next morning, I texted Ronan that Evan was coming home soon. He said, "Then let's make the most of this week." We met once more, at a cafe near the clinic. He reached across the table, brushed my wrist lightly, and said he'd miss me. I didn't pull away. The moment was small, but my guilt felt enormous. That evening, Lena drew a picture at the kitchen table, me, her, and Evan, holding hands under a sun. She handed it to me proudly. I smiled, told her it was perfect, and went to stick it on the fridge. The magnet slipped, and the paper fluttered down beside an old bill envelope labeled Utilities. The handwriting wasn't mine. Evan's letters were neat and even. The envelope was thicker than it should have been, sealed but bulging. I didn't open it. I told myself it was just receipts. When Evan finally came home, I tried to make the house feel welcoming. Fresh flowers, dinner on the stove, everything spotless. He hugged Lena first, then me. His hug was gentle but brief. I told him how proud I was of him, how much we'd missed him. He said he was glad to be back, that it felt like nothing had changed. The way he said it made me flinch. At dinner, he asked about work. I kept it casual, said things were fine, that we'd had a new supplier. He didn't look up from his plate when he said, "Ronan Hale, right?" My fork froze mid-air. "He's one of them," I said. Evan nodded, still chewing. "Good guy." I laughed too fast. "He's fine. Why?" "Just wondering who keeps leaving comments on your photos." I didn't answer. He smiled faintly, like he already knew. That night, after Lena was asleep, I walked into the kitchen for water and saw Evan sitting at the table with his phone. He didn't look up. The glow from the screen made his face unreadable. There was a soft click, a sound like a recorder stopping. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Just organizing things." I told him I was glad he was home. He said, "Me too. I've been keeping track of everything I missed." I wanted to ask what that meant, but something in his tone stopped me. The next day, I found a small USB drive on the desk, taped under a folder labeled Taxes. I didn't touch it. When I mentioned it later, Evan said it was for work. I pretended to believe him. At the clinic, Ronan texted again. So, no more coffee breaks? I wrote back, let's just be careful for now. He replied with a single heart emoji. I deleted the thread. That evening, Evan brought home takeout, something he never used to do. He asked how my day was. I said fine. He said, you always say that. I said, because it's true. He smiled faintly. I'm sure it is. When he left the room, I heard the faint whir of the printer from down the hall. A single blank sheet slid out onto the tray. I stood there staring at it, wondering why it felt like the house itself was whispering something I didn't want to hear. Later that night, as I climbed into bed, my phone buzzed. It was Ronan again. You're quiet tonight. Miss me already? Before I could answer, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Evan stood in the doorway watching me. He said, working late? I froze. Just checking messages. He nodded slowly. Good. Keep track of them. Sometimes messages are important. Then he turned off the light and walked to the guest room. I lay there in the dark, my heart pounding, the silence heavier than any argument. I still told myself it wasn't serious. It was just loneliness, a little attention, a small mistake that didn't need to mean anything. But deep down, I think I knew something had already shifted. Evan's quiet wasn't distance anymore. It was direction. He wasn't leaving. He was preparing. And I didn't even realize the story had already started writing itself. When Evan came back early, the house felt smaller. Every sound had weight again. The scrape of a chair, the closing of a drawer, the faint click of his phone when he locked the screen. I told myself it was just readjustment, that couples always need time to fall back into rhythm after time apart. But this wasn't rhythm. It was quiet precision. He unpacked methodically, folding every shirt before setting it in the dresser, stacking his toiletries in rows. I joked that he was nesting. He said, just putting things where they belong. It was the way he said it that made my throat tighten. The first week passed in uneasy politeness. We spoke like polite strangers. Every sentence was careful. I cooked, he ate. We smiled for Lena. He went to work early and came home on time. Always calm, always steady. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me, not angry, not sad, just observing. I'd snap, "What?" and he'd say, "Nothing, I'm listening." One morning I noticed his mug sitting on the opposite side of the counter from mine. It had never been there before. I asked if he'd changed sides. He said, easier to reach the sink. Small things, always logical. But each one felt deliberate, like invisible lines being drawn. At work, I tried to shake off the tension. The clinic buzzed with gossip. Someone had seen me at the cafe with Ronan weeks ago. My coworker, Elise, teased me about it, saying maybe I had a secret admirer. I laughed it off, but my stomach knotted. Ronan texted that afternoon. Miss our coffee breaks. I didn't answer. That evening, Evan came home with a box of Lena's favorite muffins. He set them on the table, then pulled a small notebook from his bag. He began writing, neat rows of numbers and words. I asked if it was for work. He said, personal. I laughed and asked if he'd taken up journaling. He said, something like that. Lena ran in, waving a drawing of the three of us at the park. Evan smiled, kissed her forehead, and said, beautiful, just like you. His warmth for her made me ache. After she went to bed, I tried to talk. You seem different, I said. Different how? I don't know. You used to talk more. He closed his notebook. Sometimes talking doesn't help. I frowned. You're acting like there's something wrong. He looked at me for a long moment. Is there? I snapped that he was being dramatic. He smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe I'm learning not to assume. The way he said that felt sharp but controlled, like a blade behind glass. Later, when I loaded the dishwasher, I saw a folded receipt tucked behind the fruit bowl, a dry cleaning slip. The pickup date was for next week. Evan hadn't worn a suit since he came home. I didn't ask. I told myself it was just leftovers from before his trip. The next morning, I found a sticky note on the fridge that said, "Paper drop, 9:40 a.m. I thought it was about work, but when I asked, he said, "Just errands." It unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. At the clinic, Ronan showed up again, all smiles. He leaned against the counter and said he'd been thinking about me. I told him to keep his voice down. He asked if I was scared someone would hear. I said I just didn't want to start rumors. He grinned and said, "Too late for that, isn't it?" That night, I found Evan at the dining table, laptop open. The screen glowed with columns of data, dates, times, notes. I asked what he was working on. He said, "Sorting things." "Work things?" He didn't look up. "Life things." "You're being weird," I said. He typed another line. "You'd be surprised how much gets clearer when you write it down." I told him I was tired of him acting suspicious. He said, "I'm not suspicious, I'm aware." We slept in separate rooms after that. He said the light in the guest room was better for reading. I started calling my mother more. She said he was probably burned out and that I should stop overthinking. "Men always retreat when they're stressed," she said. "Make him his favorite meal. Remind him what home feels like." So I did. I made his favorite stew. He thanked me politely, said it was good, and left half of it untouched. I tried to start a real conversation, asked if his project went well. He said yes, that everything was documented perfectly. I said, "You sound like a lawyer." He said, "I sound like someone who learns." After dinner, he helped Lena with her homework while I scrolled through my phone. Ronan had messaged again. "You okay?" I started typing a reply, but Evan's reflection appeared in the window behind me. He was watching silently. I locked my phone. He said, "Who was that?" "Just work stuff." He nodded. "You work a lot outside work lately." "You're reading too much into things." He didn't respond, just got up and rinsed his cup. The sound of water running felt louder than any argument. When he left the room, I checked the counter. His mug was placed upside down again, perfectly dry. A week later, we had dinner at his parents' house. Grant and Ruth always made an effort to seem calm, but the tension was visible. Ruth asked about the clinic. I said things were good, that I'd been busy organizing events. Grant asked how Evan's trip had gone. Evan said, "Productive." Then he added, "I learned the value of documentation." I laughed, trying to lighten the moment. Ruth smiled politely, but avoided my eyes. When we left, Grant walked Evan to the car and spoke to him quietly. I caught only a few words: steady, fair, process. On the drive home, I asked what that was about. He said, "Dad just gives advice." "About what?" "Fairness," he said. That night, I found a new calendar alert on his phone. Meeting, personal, Friday, 10:30 a.m. No location listed. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I started sleeping lighter. Every small sound made me jolt awake. The beep of his phone, the hum of the printer, the faint creak of the guest room door. Once, around midnight, I walked down the hall and saw him sitting at his desk, typing with slow precision. When he noticed me, he minimized the screen. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. "Working on something." "At this hour?" He smiled slightly. "Preparation takes time." "For what?" He said, "For being ready when the time comes." I told myself it was stress talking, but deep down, a part of me felt the walls closing in. At the clinic, I overheard two hygienists whispering near the break room. One said she'd seen Ronan drop by again when I wasn't on shift. The other laughed and said, "Guess he's trying to get her back." They fell silent when I walked in. That afternoon, my boss pulled me aside. She said maybe I should keep my interactions with suppliers professional. I said they were. She nodded but didn't look convinced. When I came home, Evan was in the kitchen, flipping through envelopes. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Cleaning up the paper trail." I said, "You sound paranoid." He said, "You sound worried." I felt my pulse jump. Worried about what? He smiled, slow and steady. You'll see. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. On the counter sat 2 mugs, his spotless, mine half full. Next to them was a new sticky note. Bring forms. I didn't ask what forms. Later that week, Clara, my younger sister, came over. She looked uneasy. People are talking, Mirella, she said. Someone posted a picture of you and Ronan from the cafe. It's not bad, but it's out there. I told her it was nothing, that people love drama. She said, Evan's quiet, but he's not stupid. You know that, right? I snapped that she was taking his side. She said she wasn't, just that silence can mean more than shouting. After she left, I paced the kitchen, replaying every conversation. Maybe Evan had seen the photo. Maybe that's why he was so calm. That evening, he came home later than usual. I asked where he'd been. He said, downtown. Work? He shrugged. Something like it. Then he added, I talked to someone who helps with family matters. My chest went cold. Family matters. He nodded. Just general advice. It's smart to know your options. I laughed nervously. You make it sound like we're getting divorced. He looked at me for a long second, then said, That depends on what you call loyalty. I told him he was twisting things. He said, Maybe I'm just calling them what they are. When he left the room, I stood frozen, staring at the empty space his cup had left on the counter. Later that night, I checked my phone again. Ronan had sent a message. Still thinking about you. I deleted it immediately. Then I opened my camera app and caught my reflection in the screen. Tired, scared, pretending not to be either. In the hallway, a door clicked shut. The faint sound of a drawer locking echoed through the dark. I told myself it was nothing, but the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like evidence. The night of the family dinner, I told myself everything would be fine. It had to be. Evan hadn't argued or accused me of anything in weeks, and I decided that meant things were better. He wasn't angry anymore. He was quiet, composed, civil. I took that as peace. But peace can be deceptive when it's the kind that comes right before a storm. Marcy, my mother, had arranged the dinner at her house. She said it was time to remind everyone we're still a family. I laughed, pretending I wasn't nervous, and said sure. I wore a soft green dress Evan used to like, but when I asked how I looked, he just said, appropriate. That word stung more than it should have. When we arrived, the table was already set. Candles, wine glasses, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. Marcy hugged us both, loud and cheerful. Grant, Evan's father, offered a polite nod from the head of the table. My sister Clara was already there, scrolling through her phone, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Lena ran to her grandmother, excited, showing off a drawing she'd made for school. For a few minutes, things felt almost normal. Then Marcy, always the performer, raised her glass and said, To family who sticks together, even when life gets messy. I laughed. Evan didn't. Throughout dinner, I tried to steer the conversation towards safe topics. Lena's school, my work, Evan's project. But Marcy kept poking, asking why we'd been so quiet lately. I said we'd just been busy. She smirked and said, Busy isn't always bad, dear, unless it means avoiding each other. Evan took a sip of wine, calm as ever. Sometimes quiet is better than noise, he said. Clara looked up at him, curious. That sounds deep. He smiled faintly. It's just true. I rolled my eyes. Don't turn dinner into one of your logic lessons. Marcy chuckled. Oh, let the man have his words, Mirella. He's always so composed. It's refreshing. That irritated me. Composed is just another word for cold, Mom. Evan set his fork down gently. I'm not cold. I just don't perform. Grant cleared his throat. Nothing wrong with restraint, he said. That's when I made my mistake. I laughed too loudly. Restraint. Please. If he restrained himself any more, he'd disappear. The room went quiet for a moment. I tried to soften it with a smile, but the tension lingered. Marcy laughed nervously, patting my hand. You've always had such a sharp tongue, she said. Grant glanced at Evan, then at me. Sharpness cuts both ways. I wanted to say something clever back, but Evan beat me to it. That's true, he said. I've been learning that lately. His tone wasn't cruel, but it landed heavy. I poured myself more wine, trying to act unaffected. I made a joke about how he keeps spreadsheets for everything now, even grocery lists. He tracks the milk like it's a security risk, I said. Everyone laughed, except him. He looked at me calmly and said, Some people track patterns. It helps them see what's missing. Marcy clapped her hands. See, he's talking about milk, and you're taking it personally. I'm not, I said quickly, but I was. Clara tried to change the subject, asking about my co-workers. I told her about a new supplier who'd been difficult, deliberately leaving out Ronan's name. But Evan glanced up and said, Ronan Hale? I froze. How do you know that name? He wiped his mouth with his napkin. You mentioned him before. I might have, I said. Why? He shrugged. Just remembering. The way he said it made my stomach twist. Grant asked Lena about her drawing to fill the silence. She proudly held it up, a family picture again. This time Evan was drawn with a suitcase in his hand. Everyone chuckled except me. I asked her why she added that. She said, because Daddy's always leaving. Marcy said gently, Children see everything. I smiled tightly and said, She just misses her dad. Evan looked at Lena, then back at me. I miss her too. Some things you can't fake. I took a long drink of wine. When dessert came, the room felt lighter again. Marcy started telling old stories, laughing about her younger days. Clara joined in, finally smiling. I thought maybe I'd survived the night. Then Marcy, in her usual dramatic way, said, Now, Mirella, you have to tell that funny story from work, the one about the boss and the supplier. I froze. What story? You know, she said, waving her fork, the one where that man gave you flowers in front of everyone. Evan's hand stopped midair, fork hovering over his plate. I forced a laugh. Oh, that was nothing, just office nonsense. Marcy giggled. You said the whole clinic was teasing you about it. Evan's eyes stayed on me. I could feel his stare like heat. It was just a joke, I said quickly. Didn't look like a joke in the picture, Clara muttered. I turned to her. What picture? She blinked. Someone posted it. He was handing you flowers. You were smiling. It was on the clinic's event page. Evan leaned back slightly. You didn't mention that part. I felt my pulse race. Because it wasn't important. He nodded slowly. Right, some things aren't until they are. The room went silent except for the clink of Grant's glass. Marcy tried to smooth it over, saying, Oh, everyone's making a mountain out of a molehill. Mirella's a beautiful woman. She can't help getting attention. Evan smiled faintly. Attention isn't the same as respect. Marcy frowned. Now, don't be petty. Men should be proud when their wives are admired. Evan turned to her politely. And women should be careful what kind of admiration they invite. Marcy gasped like he'd insulted her personally. Excuse me? I jumped in, my voice rising. Evan, you're being ridiculous. You're making me sound like... I'm not making you sound like anything, he said quietly. I'm just observing. Clara looked from him to me. You two should probably talk about this privately. Marcy shook her head. No, better to clear the air now. Honesty heals. Evan's gaze didn't move from me. Honesty does something, he said. Healing depends on timing. Something in his tone sent a chill through me. Grant stood up slowly, resting a hand on Evan's shoulder. You're handling this right, he said softly. Then he looked at me and added, Some things don't need arguments. They need proof. I stared at him, confused. What's that supposed to mean? Grant didn't answer. He just walked out of the room. Marcy muttered that he was being dramatic. Clara looked down at her plate. Lena whispered if she could go play. I told her yes, then turned back to Evan. If you have something to say, say it. He took a sip of water. Not yet. Not yet. I'm still collecting. The calmness in his voice made my throat dry. Collecting what? He looked at me evenly. Facts. They're easier than feelings. I laughed shakily. You sound insane. He smiled faintly. You said that before. It's becoming routine. Marcy's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She picked it up, frowned, then said she needed to check something. The tension in the room broke just enough for me to breathe again. When we finally left, the air outside felt cold. Evan opened the car door for me, still polite, still perfect. On the drive home, he didn't turn on the radio. I tried to start conversation, but he stayed quiet until we pulled into the driveway. As he turned off the engine, my phone buzzed in my purse. I glanced at it, Ronan's name on the screen. I flipped the phone face down. Evan looked straight ahead and said, "You should probably answer. It might be important." I said, "It's just work." He nodded once. "Everything is, isn't it?" He got out of the car and went inside. When I entered the kitchen a few minutes later, he was at the counter, typing something into his phone. A small red light blinked beside it. I asked what it was. He said, "A reminder." "For what?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Follow-up complete. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the pipes. I checked my phone again. Ronan had texted, "You okay?" I didn't reply. I couldn't. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of the dinner table, of faces watching me, of Evan sitting calmly while everyone else disappeared. Only his voice remained, saying quietly, "Some things don't need arguing, they just need timing." When I woke, sunlight was spilling across the bed. Evan was already gone. On the nightstand was a sticky note with the time written neatly in his handwriting, downtown 9:25. I told myself it was another meeting. But deep down, I knew the countdown had already started. The next few weeks felt like living under glass. Everything visible, nothing certain. Evan's calm was steady enough to be frightening. He didn't accuse me, didn't even raise his voice. He just went about his days with mechanical precision, and that scared me more than any argument could have. He started leaving earlier for work, always with a neat folder under his arm. When I asked what was inside, he said, "Just keeping things in order." At night, he'd sit at the kitchen table long after I went to bed, typing softly on his laptop. Once, I woke to the faint sound of the shredder humming in the guest room. I tried pretending life was normal. At the clinic, I smiled, answered calls, joked with patients. But the air had changed there too. People whispered when I passed. Someone had printed a copy of that cafe photo, Ronan handing me flowers, and taped it on the break room fridge before someone else tore it down. Ronan started acting distant. His messages were shorter now. Careful. "Let's keep things quiet for a while," he wrote. I wanted to scream at him for being a coward, but I didn't reply. I couldn't afford more attention. That Friday, Evan came home early. He walked in carrying groceries and said he'd made a new budget plan. I asked why. He said, "It's practical." I told him he didn't need to handle everything alone. He said, "You've handled enough." I told him he was twisting things again. He smiled faintly. "You're good at saying that when the mirror turns." I wanted to shout, but Lena ran in from the living room, asking if we could go to the park. Evan said sure. The way he said it, gentle, patient, made me feel small. At the playground, I sat on the bench watching Lena climb the slide. A woman from school, Sandra, sat down beside me. She smiled politely, then said, "I heard your husband's been home for a while now." "Yeah," I said cautiously. She nodded, eyes forward. "That's good. Some men wouldn't come back after what people say." My heart lurched. "What are people saying?" She looked at me then, almost apologetic. "Just gossip, you know. That you and a supplier got a little too close. I told them it's nonsense, but you know how things spread." I forced a laugh. People have nothing better to do. Sandra smiled awkwardly and stood. Anyway, take care. When I got home, I slammed the front door harder than necessary. Evan was in the kitchen cleaning the counter. He didn't flinch. You talked to anyone lately? I asked. He glanced up. Why? Because people are whispering about me, that's why. He wiped his hands. Whispers need air. I'm not the one breathing them. I glared at him. You think this is funny? He shook his head. No, I think it's predictable. I said he was being cruel. He said, I'm being patient. Then, as he turned to leave, he added quietly, You should start being careful. Words travel faster than proof. That night, I found a small key on his desk, new, silver, attached to a blank tag. When I tried it on the locked drawer, it didn't fit. He must have changed the lock. The USB that used to sit under the taxes folder was gone too. I called my mother. She said Evan was trying to intimidate me, that I needed to stand my ground. Men like that only respect fear, she said. Don't let him make you feel guilty. Clara, on the other hand, said the opposite. Stop playing games, Mirella. If he's this calm, he's already 10 steps ahead. I hung up on her. The next day, Ronan came into the clinic to drop off paperwork. His eyes darted around like he was afraid someone might see us. He said quietly, Your husband called my office last week. My blood went cold. What? Why? He asked about our delivery logs, said there was a billing issue. That's ridiculous. Ronan nodded. He didn't sound angry, just deliberate. I wanted to ask what he said, but my boss walked in. Ronan handed me the folder, whispered, You need to fix this, and left. That evening, I told Evan I ran into Ronan. He looked up from his laptop. Oh, how is he? I hesitated. Fine. Good, he said, closing the lid. He's been busy. I've seen his reports. I stared at him. You've what? He smiled faintly. Public information mostly. Why are you doing this? He met my eyes. Because when people rewrite truth, someone has to keep the drafts. I told him he was acting like a detective. He said, No, detectives look for clues. I collect certainties. Lena came into the kitchen, sleepy, asking for water. Evan picked her up gently, carried her to the sink and said, Drink slowly, sweetheart. His voice was soft, steady. She smiled, and for a second, everything looked normal again. But when he put her back to bed, he passed me without a glance. Later, when I checked the laptop he'd left on the table, the desktop was almost empty. 2 folders, labeled Archive A and Archive B. I clicked them, but they were password protected. The next morning, as I packed Lena's lunch, Evan came in dressed neatly in a dark suit. He poured his coffee, set down the mug, and said, I'll be out most of the day. Work? I asked. Something downtown. 11:15. I tried to sound casual. Meeting? He nodded. Something like that. Then, almost kindly, he added, You should keep your phone close today. When he left, the house felt hollow. I checked the window, watching his car pull away, and noticed the back seat filled with neat binders. By noon, I was pacing. Every sound in the house made me jump. The ring of the phone, the hum of the fridge, the wind brushing against the windows. I called Marcy and told her I thought Evan was planning something. She said, Let him. Maybe it'll scare you straight. I hung up. By late afternoon, he still hadn't come home. When he finally did, he was calm as ever, carrying a folder tucked under his arm. He set it on the counter and asked how my day was. Fine, I said. He smiled. That word again. I asked what he'd been doing downtown. He said, Making sure things are filed properly. Filed? He nodded. Sometimes paperwork needs to be perfect before it's used. My pulse spiked. Used for what? He didn't answer. He just poured himself another coffee, rinsed his mug, and said, Don't worry, you'll know soon. That night, I sat awake in bed, the silence pressing against my ears. Down the hall, the faint glow under the guest room door flickered once, then went dark. I still told myself I hadn't done anything truly wrong. Just one small mistake, a few bad choices, nothing that couldn't be fixed with an apology. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized something that made my stomach turn. Evan wasn't angry anymore because anger had an end. Whatever he was building didn't. The next morning, when I came into the kitchen, his side of the counter was spotless again. But this time, there was no mug, no note, no sign of coffee at all. Only a single phrase written neatly on a scrap of paper, handled properly. The week of the work gala arrived, and I convinced myself it was the perfect chance to prove everything was fine. The annual dental supply event was crowded. Suppliers, co-workers, clients, a few friends from other clinics. I spent hours choosing the dress, shoes, even the right shade of lipstick. Everything had to show confidence. I told myself Evan wouldn't notice. I told myself it didn't matter if he did. The moment I walked in, the energy hit me. The hum of conversations, clinking glasses, sparkling lights. I scanned the crowd for Ronan. There he was, smiling, waving me over. I laughed, feeling a rush of adrenaline. It wasn't romantic, it was validation, proof I still commanded attention. We talked by the refreshment table. He made a joke, I laughed, and lightly touched his arm. Small, innocent gestures, or so I thought. I didn't see the murmuring crowd behind us, whispering, pointing, cameras flashing. The moment my private attention with Ronan became public was instantaneous. Somewhere across the room, Evan stood. Calm, observant. He didn't flinch. He didn't confront me. He just watched. My stomach knotted. I wanted him to yell, to demand answers, but he never did. His quiet was heavier than any argument I'd ever endured. The slideshow started, showing images from past events. One image lingered longer than the others, a picture of me and Ronan at the cafe, smiling. The murmurs started, quiet at first, then louder. Colleagues whispered, exchanged glances. My heart raced. I laughed, tried to deflect, calling it an office joke, but the undercurrent of judgment was unmistakable. Evan didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stayed composed, watching the scene unfold. That calmness, perfect, controlled, unshakable, made my chest tighten. Pride and fear collided inside me. When the event ended, Evan waited by the exit. He didn't approach me directly, didn't scold or lecture. He just stood there, silent, composed. "We should go home," he said. His voice was calm, steady, and that was worse than shouting. In the car, I tried to speak. "You didn't say anything back there. Why not?" "No need," he said. "No need. People were looking. Everyone could see." "Everyone saw. I'll handle the rest," he replied. Then, almost casually, he added one word. "Properly." The word froze me. Properly. It carried weight. It wasn't a threat, exactly, but a promise. At home, the kitchen was immaculate. His mug was on the opposite side of the counter, clean, dry. I tried to pour myself tea, but my hands shook. His laptop lay open on the table. 2 folders, Archive A and Archive B. I clicked them, but passwords blocked me. I didn't try harder. I couldn't. The night was quiet. Lena slept. The glow from the guest room flickered, then went dark. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I hadn't done anything that deserved this tension. But deep down, I knew the truth. Evan's patience wasn't weakness. It was preparation. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the bed. I went to the kitchen. 2 mugs, his spotless, mine half full. On the fridge, a sticky note in his precise handwriting. "Bring forms." I didn't touch it. I didn't ask. Later, I found myself in the courthouse lobby, a place I never imagined I'd be. Cameras flashed from bystanders. The clerk called my name, handed me a sealed envelope. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside, a court-ordered DNA test notice. Immediate compliance required. Evan stood beside me, calm, composed, unshakable. I whispered, "You really think I'd lie?" "I don't think," he said quietly. "I verify." I froze. The crowd, the photos, the whispers, and now the legal notice. They all collided in my chest. Every move I'd made, every attempt to control the story, evaporated in a single, precise moment. The result had landed, and I was powerless. Evan's quiet had finally spoken louder than my words, my jokes, my justification. For the first time, I saw clearly that preparation and patience were stronger than pride and charm, and I realized I had lost before I even knew the game had started.